The last time I drove to Atlanta, I sat outside my son's house for 23 minutes. I know it was 23 minutes because I watched the clock on my dashboard the whole time, the way you watch a pot you're not sure you want to boil. The lights were on inside. I could see them through the front window, my son Darius and his boy Noah sitting at the kitchen table together. Darius was saying something and Noah was laughing, that big open laugh that 14-year-olds have before they learn to keep it smaller. I could see the shape of it even through the glass. I sat in my car in the dark and I watched my family through a window. Then I started the engine and drove 4 hours back to Savannah. I want to tell you that story. The whole of it, from the beginning, because I think some of you have sat in similar cars outside similar windows and told yourselves the same things I told myself on that drive home. That you were giving them space. That you'd call tomorrow. That everything was fine, just a little quiet lately. Just the natural distance that comes when children grow up and build their own lives. I told myself all of those things for 3 years. My name is Isabel. I am 68 years old. I raised one son mostly alone after my husband Raymond died, and I did it the only way I knew how, which was the way my mother Ruby raised me, which was the way Ruby's mother raised her, which was the way women in our family have been doing things for longer than any of us can trace. You keep moving. You don't stop for tears. You love people by making sure they have what they need, and you trust that they know what the doing means, even when you can't find the words. I thought I had broken that pattern. I said I love you to Darius every single day of his life. I went to every school play, every graduation, every important thing. I called every Sunday. I thought the calling and the saying and the showing up meant I had done something different from Ruby, something better. Then one evening, when Darius was 38 years old, he said something to me that I have been turning over in my hands ever since. The way you turn over a stone that's too heavy to put down and too strange to throw away. He said, "Mom, I know you love me. I just never felt like you saw me." I didn't know what to do with those words, so I did what I had always done. I kept moving. I told myself he was tired or stressed or going through something that had nothing to do with me. I filed it away in the place where I kept things I wasn't ready to look at. 3 years later, I was sitting outside his house in the dark, watching him laugh with his son through a window I was afraid to knock on. I have spent 68 years being a strong woman. I have buried a mother and a husband. I have worked night shifts and double shifts and shifts that blurred into each other until I couldn't remember what day it was. I have been called capable and steady and a rock, and every word people use when they mean she doesn't need anything from us. What I am about to tell you is the story of how I learned that being a rock is not the same as being present, that loving someone loudly is not the same as loving them in the language they can actually hear, and that the patterns we carry from the women who raised us do not disappear just because we are aware of them. They wait, quiet and patient as anything. And then one day you look at your son through a window and you realize the distance between you was not built in a day, and it was not built by strangers. You built it. One small silence at a time. The drive home from Atlanta that night took 4 hours. I spent most of it trying not to think. But somewhere around the Georgia state line, in the particular dark of a highway at midnight, I stopped trying. I thought about Ruby. I thought about Darius. I thought about Noah writing a school essay about the person who shaped him most, and who he chose, and why. And I thought, it is not too late to learn a different language. This is how I started. Ruby was born in 1931 in a county in South Georgia that most maps barely bothered to include. Her father died of a fever when she was 4 years old, leaving her mother Cora with 6 children, a rented house on land they didn't own, and the specific kind of poverty that doesn't announce itself because everyone around you has the same thing. Cora raised those 6 children by deciding somewhere around 1933 that softness was a liability, not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that, because this story has no villains, only people doing the best they could with what had been done to them. Cora made that decision out of necessity, the way a farmer boards up windows before a storm. The world was not safe for a black woman alone in South Georgia in the 1930s. Feeling things too deeply was a way of getting swept away, so Cora stopped. Or rather, she redirected. She poured every tender thing she had into function, into making sure there was food, into making sure the children were clean and present at school, and prepared for a world that would demand twice as much from them for half as much return. Soft things break, Cora used to say. Ruby heard that every year of her childhood. By the time she was grown, she had internalized it so completely that she couldn't have told you it was a belief rather than a fact. It simply was true, the way gravity is true. You didn't argue with it. You organized your life around it. Ruby was intelligent and determined and genuinely funny in the dry, understated way of women who have learned to find the absurdity in hard things. She moved to Savannah at 19, got a job pressing clothes in a hotel laundry, and married my father Earl when she was 22. She had me at 24. She loved me. I want to say that clearly and mean it, because I have spent too many years having complicated feelings about my mother to lose sight of the simple truth at the center. Ruby loved me with everything she had. She worked before I was up and after I was in bed. She made sure I had the right shoes for school and a winter coat that fit. When I was sick, she stayed up through the night, not sleeping, just present in the particular watchful way of mothers who have decided that vigilance is love. She just couldn't tell me. I remember once, I was 8 years old, maybe 9, coming home from school crying because a group of older girls had said things about my hair, the particular cruelty that girls that age can manufacture with such precision. I came through the back door still crying, and Ruby was at the kitchen table, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't read then and still struggle to fully translate now. Something moved across her face. Something real. Something that was not nothing. Then she said, "Dry your face. The world doesn't stop for tears." I dried my face. I sat down, and 20 minutes later, Ruby put a bowl of her bread pudding in front of me. The good kind. The kind she only made on Sundays and special occasions, without saying a word. She went back to whatever she'd been doing. That was Ruby's language. The bread pudding was the hug. The staying up through the night was the I love you. The coat that fit was every soft thing she couldn't say out loud. I learned to receive love that way. I just never learned to translate it. I was the first person in my family to go to college. Spelman, on a partial scholarship that I supplemented by working 20 hours a week in the campus library. The morning Ruby put me on the bus to Atlanta, she stood on the sidewalk outside our house in a dress she'd ironed the night before, her hands folded in front of her face doing the thing it always did when she was feeling something she wasn't going to say. She did not hug me. She said, "Don't come back without something to show for it." I carried that sentence with me for 40 years. For a long time, I heard it as pressure. Later, I tried to hear it as love. What I understand now, sitting on my back porch at 68 with Ruby 15 years gone, is that it was both, and that the tragedy of it was that she didn't know another way to say, "I am so proud of you. It is taking everything I have to watch you leave." I became a registered nurse. I met Raymond in 1979 at a hospital in Savannah, where he was doing maintenance work and I was finishing my third 12-hour shift in a row, and we were both waiting for the elevator at 6:15 in the morning. He looked at me and said, "You look like you could use somebody to carry something." I married him 14 months later. Raymond was the opposite of Ruby in every way that mattered. He was warm the way a room is warm. You walked into his presence and something in you relaxed without you deciding to. He laughed easily. He said "I love you" the way other people say good morning, automatically, genuinely, without drama. He made Darius feel, from the time our son was old enough to understand language, that being himself was not just acceptable, but actively wonderful. I loved Raymond for many things, but what I loved most was what he did for the space between me and my son, the space I didn't know how to fill with Ruby's language and hadn't yet found my own. Raymond was the bridge. When Raymond died, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, Darius 16 years old and in the middle of everything a 16-year-old is in the middle of. I lost my husband and my son lost his father, and we were both suddenly on either side of a bridge that no longer existed. I handled it the way Ruby had taught me. I arranged the funeral in 48 hours. I went back to work in 3 weeks. I made sure Darius had everything he needed: food, a roof, his father's watch, and a mother who was handling it. Because handling it was the only way I knew to say "I am devastated, and I need you to know we will survive this." What Darius needed was for me to cry with him. I didn't know that. Not then. Darius was a good kid. I want you to know that before I tell you the rest, because the rest could make it sound like he wasn't, and that would be wrong. He was curious and funny and loyal in the way that some young men are loyal. Quietly, without announcement, just reliably there. He got decent grades, had good friends, went to Georgia State on a combination of scholarships and loans and my savings. and came out the other side with an engineering degree and the particular self-possession of someone who has figured out, mostly on his own, who he is. He met Keisha in his late 20s, married her at 32. They have Noah, who is 14 now and plays drums in his school jazz band and has Raymond's hands and Darius's laugh and a way of looking at the world that makes me think he sees more of it than most people his age. On the surface, a good family, a good life. A mother and son who talked every Sunday and saw each other at Thanksgiving and Christmas and the occasional summer visit. Below the surface was the thing neither of us was talking about. Here is what I didn't know I was doing to Darius for all those years. When he called me in college excited about a history paper he'd written, I asked how his other grades were. When he called me at 28 to say he'd lost his job at the engineering firm, budget cuts, not performance, nothing he could have prevented, I spent the first 4 minutes of the conversation asking whether he had updated his resume and whether he had reached out to the contact I'd mentioned 6 months earlier. I don't remember asking how he was holding up. He told me later, much later, that during those 8 months of unemployment, he started taking my calls standing in the hallway outside their apartment. So Keisha couldn't see his face afterward. When he was 35 and called to tell me he and Keisha were expecting Noah, the second sentence out of my mouth was, "Have you looked at the school districts?" They hadn't even told his in-laws yet. I am not a bad mother. I need you to understand that, not because I'm defending myself. I am done defending myself, but because that is the specific and important truth of this kind of damage. It isn't done by bad mothers. It is done by mothers who love their children so much that the love comes out sideways, as management, as preparation, as an endless forward-looking vigilance that never quite stops to ask, right now, in this moment, how are you? Ruby did it to me. I did it to Darius. And the morning I realized that Darius was doing everything in his power to make sure he didn't do it to Noah, the morning I understood that my son had spent years consciously, deliberately breaking a pattern I hadn't even admitted was there, was the morning the bread pudding finally made sense. My friend Gloria has been in my life for 40 years. We met at a neighborhood association meeting in 1984, disagreed loudly about a zoning proposal, and somehow ended up getting coffee afterward and never really stopped. She is the person who tells me the truth when I have made it clear I do not want to hear it, which is often, and which is why I have kept her close. It was Gloria who told me about the therapy. She'd run into Keisha at the Kroger on a Tuesday afternoon. The kind of run-in that happens in a city the size of Savannah, where everyone eventually turns up in the same grocery store. They'd chatted for a few minutes, the pleasant surface conversation of women who like each other and don't know each other well. And somewhere in it, naturally, the way conversation naturally moves, Keisha had mentioned that Darius had his Thursday thing, so she was doing the shopping alone this week. Thursday thing. Gloria, who misses nothing, filed that away and thought about it for 2 days before she said anything to me. When she did, she was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and she said it quietly, the way you say something when you're not sure if it's going to land badly. "Isabel, I think Darius might be seeing someone. A therapist, I mean. Has he said anything to you?" He had not said anything to me. I sat with that for a moment. 3 years of Thursday appointments. 12 weeks a year, 52 weeks in 3 years. I did the arithmetic automatically, because I am my mother's daughter, and arithmetic is easier than feeling. 156 Thursdays, give or take. My son had been sitting in someone's office, talking about his life for 156 Thursdays, and he had not told me. My first thought, and I am not proud of it, but honesty is the only point of telling this story, was not what did I do? It was, why didn't he tell me? What is there that he can't say to his own mother? I said this out loud, which was my first mistake. Gloria looked at me over her coffee cup with the expression she reserves for moments when she has decided I need to hear something I'm not going to like. "Isabel," she said. "Honey, that question is the answer." I didn't say anything. "The reason he can't tell you," she said gently, "is sitting in the question you just asked." She left an hour later. I stood at the sink and washed both our cups and thought about what she'd said, and the more I thought about it, the less I wanted to think about it, which meant it was probably true. I did not call Darius. This was unusual. My instinct in any situation involving my son was to call immediately and address whatever needed addressing. But something stopped me this time. Something small and still, like a hand placed quietly on my arm. I sat with it instead. For an entire week, I sat with the question Gloria had reflected back at me, And I tried, for the first time in recent memory, to let it ask itself without jumping to answer it. What is there that he can't say to his own mother? By the end of the week, I had something approaching an honest answer. Everything that might make her see him as something other than fine. There were 3 specific memories that surfaced during that week. I had thought about all 3 of them before, but always quickly, always with a reason ready for why they meant something other than what they appeared to mean. That week I sat with them without the reasons. The first was from when Darius was 15. He had won a regional science competition, a genuine achievement, a project he had worked on for 4 months on the subject of structural load distribution and bridge design. I was proud in the way that made it hard to breathe, the big physical pride that parents know. I brought that award to church the following Sunday. I introduced Darius to everyone who would listen. I told the story of his project to people who had not asked. That evening, Darius said to me, "Mom, did you actually read it? The project itself?" I said, "Of course I'm proud of you." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "That's not what I asked." I had not read the project. I had read the score on the certificate. I hadn't understood that those were different things to him. The second memory was from his year of unemployment, the year he stood in the hallway to take my calls. I found out about the hallway later, from Keisha, in an offhand way that Keisha clearly didn't realize would land the way it did. I filed it away. I did not take it out and look at it until that week. My son stood in a hallway so his wife wouldn't see his face after talking to his mother. I let myself feel that. Fully, without the reason behind it. The third memory was his 40th birthday. I had sent a card and a check. I had written, "So proud of the man you've become," in my best handwriting. I had thought it was a beautiful card. I had gotten the date wrong by 1 day. I called on the wrong day. When I realized my mistake, I called again and apologized, and Darius said it was fine. No big deal. Don't worry about it. He said it the way people say things when they have decided the feeling isn't worth the conversation. I had moved on. I had accepted it's fine, as it's fine. What I understood that week, sitting in my kitchen in Savannah with Gloria's question still in the air, was that I had done that my entire life. I had accepted it's fine from my son because pursuing it would have required me to sit with something uncomfortable, and sitting with uncomfortable things was not in Ruby's curriculum, and therefore not in mine. Dry your face. Keep moving. It will be fine. It was not entirely fine. The last day of that week, I drove to the pharmacy on Habersham Street to pick up a prescription, and on the way back, I sat in the parking lot of a closed dry cleaner and cried for about 10 minutes. Not beautifully, not quietly, the way crying in movies looks, but the real kind, ugly and ungraceful. The kind Ruby never did in front of me. The kind I had not let myself do in front of Darius after Raymond died. Then I went home, washed my face, and started figuring out what to do next. There is a particular loneliness that nobody warns you about when your children grow up. Not the loneliness of an empty house. I had made my peace with that years ago, after Darius left for college, and I spent 3 weeks reorganizing closets before I admitted what I was actually doing. Not the loneliness of missing someone, which at least has a clean shape and a name. This was something more confusing. This was the loneliness of being in the same room as your child, or on the phone with him, or sitting at his Thanksgiving table, and feeling a glass wall between you that neither of you will acknowledge. You can see each other perfectly clearly. You just can't quite touch. I retired from the hospital at 65 after 34 years of nursing and settled into what I told people was a quiet life and what was actually a very structured avoidance of stillness. I tended my vegetable garden behind the house on Abercorn Street. Tomatoes, collards, 3 kinds of peppers, the rosemary bush that had been there since Raymond planted it in 1987 and showed no signs of dying before either of us. I went to Reverend Thomas's church every Sunday, sang in the choir on the 2nd and 4th Sundays of the month, and served on the hospitality committee, which meant I cooked for every funeral reception and church anniversary and visiting speaker the congregation hosted. People called me Miss Isabel with a particular kind of warmth that meant she is one of the ones you can count on. I was used to being counted on. I was good at it. I called Darius every Sunday at 4 o'clock. The calls lasted between 12 and 25 minutes, which I know because I am a woman who notices patterns, and a phone conversation with my son had become something I was tracking without admitting I was tracking it. He was always pleasant. He asked about my health, about Gloria, about whether the city had fixed the drainage issue on my block that I had complained about since 2019. I asked about his work, about Keisha's sister who had been having some health issues, about Noah's school. The conversations were warm in the way that a hotel lobby is warm, comfortable, well-maintained, and specifically designed to not be anyone's actual home. Once, about 8 months before I drove to Atlanta and sat in the car, I asked Darius on one of our Sunday calls, "How are you really doing?" He paused just long enough for me to notice the pause. Then he said, "I'm good, Mom. Things are good." I accepted it. The pause was the thing I should have asked about. I didn't. The distance with Noah was newer, and in some ways harder to sit with, because with Darius I could tell myself the distance had accumulated over decades, and there were reasons, layers, history. With Noah it was recent and specific, and I knew, somewhere beneath the explanations I kept reaching for, that I had done something. He had called me every week the previous year. Sunday evenings, unprompted, always from his room, his voice carrying the particular unguarded quality of a teenager talking to someone he trusted. He told me about his friends, about his drum teacher, Mr. Allen, who was, in Noah's words, hard but fair, like a good pair of shoes. He told me about a girl he liked and then didn't like and then wasn't sure about. He told me things he probably didn't tell his parents, the way children sometimes choose a grandparent as the safe container for what they're figuring out. I had loved those calls. I had looked forward to them the way I looked forward to very few things in that season of my life. Then, gradually, they became every other week. Then, once a month. Then, 3 weeks before I drove to Atlanta, Noah didn't call. I waited until Wednesday, told myself he was busy, waited until Friday, told myself he was a teenager, and teenagers lost track of things. Sent a text on Saturday. "Missed your call this week. Hope you're well, baby." He replied with a thumbs-up emoji and a "sorry grandma been crazy busy." A thumbs up. I sat with that thumbs up for a long time. The answer came on a Sunday in October, when I drove up to Atlanta for what Darius had described as a casual visit. Lunch, maybe a walk, nothing formal. I arrived at noon to find Keisha making sandwiches and the house in the comfortable low-level disorder of a family's real Sunday. Noah was at the kitchen table with his backpack open, papers spread in front of him, the specific posture of a student who has left something until the last minute. I said hello. He said, "Hey, Grandma," without looking up. I went to help Keisha with the sandwiches. About 20 minutes later, Noah stuffed his papers into his backpack and headed upstairs, and in the clearing of the table, one sheet of paper was left behind, face up next to the fruit bowl. I wasn't trying to read it. I was reaching for a napkin and it was there. The heading at the top, in a teacher's template format. Personal essay, the person who shaped who you are. I would be lying if I said I didn't know, before I read further, that I was not going to be the subject of that essay. Something in me knew before my eyes moved down the page. Noah had written about his father, not about Darius in general terms, not about a collection of years or qualities, but about one specific evening. Darius had promised to take Noah to a tryout for the school basketball team. Noah had practiced for 3 months. He went to the tryout, played the best he could, and didn't make the cut. He came home and went to his room and didn't come out for dinner. Darius went upstairs. He didn't bring a speech. He didn't bring a plan for how Noah would do better next time. He brought 2 sodas, the good kind, the kind they weren't usually allowed on school nights, and he sat on the floor of Noah's room with his back against the bed, and he stayed there. For 3 hours. They talked sometimes and were quiet sometimes, and the subject of basketball came up once and then was gently set aside. Noah wrote, "He didn't tell me to try again or that I would make it next year or that this wasn't a big deal. He just sat with me like sitting with me was the only thing that needed to happen." That night I understood what it meant to have someone actually be there. That's what my dad taught me, without ever saying it was a lesson. I set the paper down. I walked to the back door and stood in Darius's small backyard, which had a live oak in the corner and a garden bed that Keisha had planted with marigolds along the fence. I stood there for what I estimate was 10 minutes, though I couldn't have sworn to it. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that, because anger would have been simpler. What I felt was something that didn't have a clean name. A recognition, sharp and uncomfortable, the way it feels to see yourself clearly in a photograph and understand that this is how you actually look. Darius had learned something I had not taught him. He had learned it in opposition to what I had taught him, consciously, deliberately, through years of deciding to be different. He had sat on the floor of his son's room for 3 hours because nobody had ever sat with him that way, and he had decided the pattern stopped with him. He had done the work, without ever once telling me he was doing it. I went back inside. Lunch was on the table. Darius was talking about something at work. Noah came downstairs and the essay was back in his backpack, and nobody mentioned it. After lunch, while Keisha was in the kitchen, I sat next to Darius on the couch, and I said as evenly as I could, "Are we okay?" He turned to look at me. Something moved through his face, a small tightening, quickly managed. "Define okay, Mom," he said. Not unkindly, just accurately. I drove home to Savannah that evening thinking about those 2 words for 4 hours straight. I have a drawer in my bedroom nightstand that I think of as the drawer of things I'm not ready for. It contains, among other things, Raymond's watch, which I cannot wear but cannot put away, a photograph of Ruby at 35 that I found after she died, taken by someone at a church picnic, in which she is laughing at something off camera with an abandon I never once saw on her face in life, and a white business envelope, handwritten, that has been in that drawer for 15 years. The envelope says, "For Isabel, open when you're ready." Ruby wrote it sometime in the last months of her life. Her handwriting was always better than mine, precise and unhurried, a hand that belonged to someone who had learned penmanship at a time when penmanship was considered a form of character. I had found it in the box of her personal papers after the funeral, and I had opened it, and I had read the first 2 pages, and then I had folded it back along its original creases and put it in the drawer and not opened it again. Not because I didn't love my mother, because I did. The 3rd page of that letter contained things I was not, at 53, ready to know about Ruby, things that would have required me to reorganize everything I thought I understood about her, and about myself, and about the particular inheritance of women in our family. I had known this the way you know something without being willing to know it. So I put it in the drawer. For 15 years it had been in there, 4 inches from where I slept every night. 3 weeks after the visit where I found Noah's essay, a Tuesday night in November, 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, the house doing the particular settling sounds old houses make in cold weather, I got up and went to the kitchen and sat at the table where Ruby had once sat in her own kitchen, doing her night work, making sure everything would be ready for a morning that would come whether she was ready or not. I sat there for a while in the dark. I was thinking about Darius's voice when he said, "Define." Okay. I was thinking about Noah's essay. I was thinking about what Gloria had said 4 weeks earlier. That question is the answer. And how I had been circling that sentence ever since without landing on it. I went to the drawer. I took out the envelope. I unfolded the letter and I read it from the beginning. The parts I'd read before and the part I hadn't. And I will tell you what my mother wrote, because it is the center of this story, the thing that made everything else possible. The first 2 pages were what I remembered. Ruby describing her childhood, her mother Cora, the doctrine of soft things break that had been passed to her as survival wisdom and that she had passed to me without examination. She wrote about it with a clear-eyed honesty that had startled me at 53 and startled me still. Ruby, who never talked about herself, writing in her final months with the precision of someone settling accounts. "I loved you in a language you couldn't hear," she wrote at the end of the 2nd page. "The saddest thing is I knew it. I just didn't know another language." That was where I had stopped, 15 years ago. Those 2 sentences had been as much as I could hold. The 3rd page began, "What I am going to tell you now is something I should have said out loud, in a room, looking at your face. I know that. I'm saying it this way because it's the only way I have left, and I am too old and too tired and too close to the end to pretend that's not true. I watched you raise Darius. I watched you love him the way I loved you, by doing, by providing, by making sure. And I watched his face when you did it. He has your eyes, that boy. And sometimes when you were managing him, when you were fixing and arranging and preparing him, I saw in his eyes the same thing you used to have in yours when I told you to dry your face. Not hurt, not anger, something quieter than that. The look of a child who has understood that the love being offered is real, but that it is not quite the shape they need. I couldn't say this to you when I was living. I was too proud or too afraid or too much my mother's daughter. But I am saying it now. You learned it from me, and I learned it from mine. And somewhere back before either of us can see, some woman in our line decided that she could not afford to be soft, and she was probably right about that. For her, in her time. But she passed it forward like it was permanent, like it was truth instead of survival. And we kept passing it. You can stop passing it, Isabel. You are not too old. It is not too late. But you have to be willing to let your son tell you something you don't want to hear, And you have to be willing not to fix it or explain it or make it better. You just have to hear it. That's the whole thing. That's all it is. I love you. I should have said that more, the regular way, out loud. Mama, I sat at that kitchen table until the sky outside the window went from black to the particular dark blue that means it's almost morning, and then from dark blue to the first gray of a November dawn. I did not move. I held the letter in my hands and read it 3 more times and let it mean what it meant. Ruby had known. She had watched me do to Darius what she had done to me, and she had known, and she had waited until she was dying to say so, because that was the only way she had. And she had been right about everything, about the look on Darius's face, about the shape of love that wasn't quite the right shape, about the chain going back further than either of us could see. And she had also said, "You can stop." I thought about Noah's essay. He just sat with me like sitting with me was the only thing that needed to happen. Darius had already stopped. My son had already done it. He had broken the chain for Noah without anyone teaching him how, the same way Ruby had broken certain other things for me, pushing me toward college, toward the world, toward a life larger than South Georgia, without anyone teaching her either. We had each managed to break some part of it. None of us had managed to break all of it alone. At 7 in the morning, I called Darius. He picked up on the 3rd ring, slightly cautious the way he always was with early calls, checking mentally for bad news. "Mom, everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I says. "Said, I'm not calling about anything wrong." A pause. "Okay," he said carefully. I had practiced what I was going to say in my head during those last 2 hours before dawn. I had tried different versions. The version that explained what had happened. Ruby's letter, the essay, the drive to Atlanta where I sat outside in the car. The version that started with an apology. The version that built up to the question through context, so that by the time I asked it, he would understand where I was coming from. I said none of those versions. I said, "Darius, I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I need to ask you something. Not to defend myself and not to respond to it right now. I just need to hear you. Can you tell me what it was like, growing up with me as your mother?" The silence that followed was the longest of my recent life. I counted 6 seconds of it before he spoke. "Mom, I'm not going anywhere," I said. "I have as much time as you need. Tell me." Another silence, shorter. I heard him breathe. I heard something shift in that breath. Some small adjustment. Some decision being made. "Can we do this in person?" he said. "Yes," I said. "Tell me when." 2 weeks, he said. "Come up on a Saturday. Just you." "I'll be there," I said. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table for another few minutes in the morning light. The rosemary bush in the backyard was visible through the window, gray-green and unchanged, Raymond's plant in Raymond's ground. I was 68 years old, and I was afraid. Not of Darius, not of what he would say. I thought I had some idea of what he would say. I was afraid of sitting still enough to hear it without defending myself. I was afraid of what it meant to be, at 68, at the beginning of something rather than the settled end. "Fear is useful for about 5 minutes," Raymond used to say, borrowing it from no one in particular, meaning it for both of us. I got up and made coffee. In 2 weeks, I would drive to Atlanta, and I would not sit in the car. The Saturday Darius had chosen was the first weekend of December, and Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does in early December. Cold enough to mean it, gray sky sitting low over everything. The kind of morning that makes you want to stay inside with something warm and not ask hard questions of anyone. I left Savannah at 6:30 in the morning. I had slept adequately, which I was grateful for. I had laid out my clothes the night before, not my church clothes, not my best things, but a gray sweater Raymond had always liked, and dark slacks and the good walking shoes. Practical. Present. The clothes of a woman who was going somewhere to do something real. I had not rehearsed what I was going to say. This was the hardest part of the preparation, harder than the drive, harder than the 2 weeks of waiting. My whole life I had gone into difficult conversations with a structure, the points I needed to make, the clarifications I would offer, the reasonable explanation for why things had been the way they had been. I was good at this. 34 years of nursing requires you to be able to walk into a room where someone is frightened or angry or grieving and organize the situation. Assess, communicate, manage. It was as natural to me as breathing. For this conversation, I had decided I was not going to manage anything. I was going to sit down. I was going to listen. And whatever Darius said, I was going to let it land where it landed, without moving it, without softening it, without immediately building the response that would reframe it into something I could handle. Ruby had needed to put it in a letter because she didn't know how to do it face to face. I was going to try to do it face to face. Darius met me at the door. Keisha had taken Noah to his drum lesson. I learned later this had been deliberate, that Darius had asked for the morning, that Keisha had made it possible without being asked twice. She is a good woman. She has always understood things about my son that I was still learning. Hey, Mom. Hey, baby. We hugged in the doorway the way we always did. Real but brief, both of us slightly careful with each other in the way we'd been careful for years. Then he led me not to the living room, not to the kitchen table where I'd found Noah's essay, but to the back of the house, through the sliding door and onto the small covered porch that looked out over his backyard. 2 chairs, a small table between them, a thermos of coffee, 2 mugs, a plate of the shortbread cookies I had taught him to make when he was 10 years old, and that he still made, apparently, from the same recipe. I looked at the cookies. Something moved in my chest. Sit down, Mom, he said, not unkindly. I sat. He poured the coffee. We both wrapped our hands around our mugs and looked out at the backyard for a moment. The live oak in the corner, the marigolds Keisha had planted along the fence, brown now in December but still holding their shape. A cardinal moved through the branches of the oak. We watched it. Then Darius set down his mug and he began to talk. He didn't start with an accusation. I want you to understand that, because I think when we imagine these conversations, the ones we've been avoiding for years, we imagine them beginning with someone's anger, with a door slamming open. Darius did not begin with anger. He began the way you begin when you have spent a long time preparing not to be misunderstood. He said, I want to start by saying I know you love me. That has never been the question. The question I've been sitting with, the one I've been working on for a while, is something different. Okay, I said. The question is, what it felt like to be loved by you. He looked at me when he said it. I looked back. I did not look away. You were always there, Mom. You came to everything. You called every Sunday. You made sure I had everything I needed, and I never doubted that. But there was this other thing, underneath all of it. Something I couldn't name when I was a kid, but that I've been able to name more recently. He paused, picked up his mug, put it down without drinking. Your love always felt like it was pointed forward, like it was always about the next thing, what I needed to do, what I needed to fix, what I should be preparing for. When I succeeded at something, you were proud in this big public way. When I struggled, when I was actually struggling, not just facing an obstacle that needed solving, I could feel you get uncomfortable, like you didn't know what to do with me when I wasn't okay. I breathed. I kept my hand still on my mug. When Dad died, he said, and his voice changed the way voices do when they approach the real thing, I needed you to fall apart a little bit with me. Just a little. I wasn't asking you to fall apart completely. I knew you couldn't. I knew you had to hold things together. I understood that even at 16, but I needed to see that you were also devastated, that it was allowed to be as bad as it was. And instead, I arranged the funeral, I said quietly. He looked at me. In 48 hours, I said. He nodded, a small nod, the nod of someone who has waited a long time to be understood about something. I went back to work in 3 weeks, I said. I made sure you had everything you needed. You did, he said. You did do all of that. And I also spent the next 6 months watching you to see if you were going to cry. Because if you weren't going to cry, then I wasn't allowed to cry either. That was the rule I understood, even if you never said it. The cardinal was back in the oak tree. I watched it for a moment, and I thought about Ruby standing on the sidewalk the morning I left for college, hands folded, not crying, not hugging me, saying don't come back without something to show for it. I thought about myself at 8 years old with my face wet, hearing dry your face, the world doesn't stop for tears. I thought about passing that along without ever deciding to. Darius wasn't finished. I'm not telling you this to hurt you, he said. I need you to know that. I'm telling you because you called me 2 weeks ago and asked. In 41 years, Mom, that was the first time you asked a question that you didn't already have an answer for. And I thought, If she's actually asking, then maybe I can actually tell her. He looked at his hands. I've been going to therapy for 3 years. I know, I said. He looked up. Gloria, I said. She ran into Keisha. She told me. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. Something shifted in his face. A slight surprise, quickly followed by something else. Something that looked, if I was reading it right, like a small measure of relief that the kept secret was no longer something he had to keep. It's helped, he said. It's helped me understand some things about why I am the way I am, about what I absorbed growing up, and what I've had to consciously unlearn, and what I want to make sure I don't pass to Noah. Like sitting on the floor of his room, I said. He went very still. The essay, I said. I didn't mean to read it. It was on the table. I only saw part of it, but... I stopped. He wrote about the night he didn't make the basketball team. He wrote about you sitting with him for 3 hours without trying to fix anything. Darius didn't say anything for a moment. Something was moving through his expression that was complex and quiet and not quite nameable. I learned that by figuring out what I'd needed and never gotten, he said finally. Not because anyone taught me. I know, I said. I know that. The porch was quiet. Somewhere in the neighborhood a dog was barking at something. 2 short barks, and then silence. The sky had lightened slightly while we'd been sitting there, the gray thinning toward something that might, by afternoon, become actual light. I set my mug down. I put both hands flat on my thighs. I looked at my son. Darius, I said. Yeah. You're right. He looked at me. About all of it. I didn't know how to just be with you. I knew how to do things for you, manage things for you, prepare things for you. I told myself that was love, and in a way it was. It was the only way I knew. But it wasn't what you needed. And I'm sorry. I watched his face. I'm not going to explain why, I said. I could. I could tell you about Ruby and her mother and all the women back before either of us can see, and it would all be true. But you didn't ask me for an explanation, so I'm not going to give you one. I'm just going to say, you're right, and I'm sorry. The silence that followed was the most important silence of my life. No, I did my best. No, you have to understand the circumstances. No turning the conversation gently toward my own difficulty and asking him, implicitly, to take care of me while I processed his pain. Just you're right, and I'm sorry. Darius looked at me for a long moment. His eyes were bright. He blinked once, looked out at the oak tree, looked back at me. Twist 5. Mom, he said. His voice was different now. Something in it had come loose, the careful management of it released. I didn't come here for an apology. I waited. I know it might seem like that's what this conversation was building toward, but that's not... He stopped, gathered himself. I've already done the work of forgiving you. I did that in therapy. I didn't need to wait for you to apologize to do that. I did it for myself, so I could stop carrying something heavy that was slowing me down with my own kid. He leaned forward in his chair. What I needed, what I've needed for a long time, was for you to ask, to actually ask, without the answer already in your hands. That phone call 2 weeks ago, at 7 a.m, when you said tell me what it was like and then you actually waited, his voice caught. That was the thing, Mom. That was the whole thing. That was more than the apology. I understood then what I had not fully understood before. The apology mattered, but the asking, the willingness to be still and not know and wait, that was what had been missing for 41 years. That was what Ruby could not do for me. That was what I had not known how to do for Darius. And 2 weeks ago, at 7 a.m, in a kitchen in Savannah, I had done it. Not perfectly, not without fear, just done it. I reached across the small table between our chairs and I put my hand over my son's hand. He turned his hand over and held mine. We sat like that for a while, looking out at the oak tree and the brown marigolds and the winter sky going slowly lighter. The shortbread cookies sat on the plate between us, untouched and perfect, the same recipe they had always been. Tell me something, I said after a while. What? Tell me something about your life that you've never told me because you didn't think I'd just listen. He laughed, a short laugh, surprised out of him. Then he started talking, and I listened. Not everything was repaired that morning on Darius's back porch. I want to be honest about that because this is a true kind of story, The kind where things get better in the imperfect and ongoing way that real things get better. Not all at once, not completely, but genuinely. Darius and I talked for 3 hours. By the time Keisha brought Noah home from drum lesson, the thermos was empty, and the shortbread was mostly gone, and something in the atmosphere between us had changed in a way that didn't have a precise word, but that both of us could feel. Noah came through the back door, saw us on the porch, and said, "You guys okay?" The way teenagers say things when they suspect the adults have been doing something emotional and are not sure they want to know. "We're good," Darius said. Noah looked at us for a moment with the assessing eyes of a 14-year-old who reads rooms well. Then he said okay and went inside, and 2 minutes later the faint sound of drumming came through the ceiling above us. Noah practicing on his practice pad in his room, the soft rhythmic sound of someone working through something they loved. We both looked up at the ceiling when we heard it. Darius smiled. I smiled. "He's good," I said. "He's really good," Darius said, and the pride in his voice was the uncomplicated kind, the kind that didn't need the next sentence, didn't need and he needs to keep working, or as long as he keeps his grades up. Just, he is good. Full stop. Present tense. Enough. I heard the difference. I had always loved Darius, but I was learning, late and slowly and with genuine effort, how to let that love be the shape it needed to be rather than the shape I knew. 3 months later, in early spring, I called Dr. Patricia Owens. I had gotten her name from Darius, who had mentioned it during one of our Wednesday calls. We had switched from Sundays to Wednesdays. Darius had suggested it, and I had said yes without asking why not Sunday, because I was practicing saying yes to the form of things rather than needing them to be my form. The Wednesday calls were different from the Sunday calls. I cannot fully explain why, except that something about the midweek timing made them feel like part of life rather than a scheduled checkpoint. We talked about more. We went off topic more. Twice Darius had called me on a Thursday, just to finish a thought from Wednesday, and both times I had answered immediately and felt something open in my chest that I didn't have a name for but that I recognized as good. Dr. Owens's office was in a building on Abercorn Street, 12 minutes from my house. Her waiting room had plants in it, real ones, well tended. I sat in a chair by the window and looked at the plants and thought about the fact that I had spent 68 years being capable and managed and together, and that the bravest thing I had done recently was ask my son a question and wait for the answer. Dr. Owens was direct and unhurried and asked good questions, which I respected. In our second session, she asked me what I was hoping to leave behind and what I was hoping to carry forward. I thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. What I wanted to leave behind. The reflex to manage. The discomfort with stillness. The belief, absorbed from Ruby and Cora and whoever came before Cora, that softness was a liability rather than a form of strength. What I wanted to carry forward. Ruby's endurance. Ruby's honesty in that letter. Ruby's love, translated at last into a language people could hear. In April, I planted the garden on Abercorn Street with the particular hopefulness of someone who has decided to pay attention to what grows. Tomatoes again? Collards, the 3 kinds of peppers. New this year, a row of zinnias along the back fence, because Raymond had liked zinnias and I had never planted them before, and I was trying to understand why not. Gloria came over on a Saturday morning and sat on the back step with coffee while I worked in the dirt, and at some point she said, "You seem different." "I feel different," I said. "Good different or complicated different?" I thought about it. "Both," I said, "but mostly good." She nodded. Gloria has been receiving my honest answers for 40 years, and she receives them without making a ceremony of it, which is one of the reasons I have kept her close. "Ruby would be proud of you," she said. I turned that over for a moment the way I turned over most things now, with more time, with more willingness to feel the weight of them. "I think she already was," I said. "She just didn't know another language." The first Sunday in May, 6 months after I had sat outside Darius's house in the dark and watched my family through a window and driven away, Noah called me. Not because anyone told him to, not because it was a holiday or a birthday or an occasion. He called on a Sunday evening from his room, the same way he used to, and when I answered he said, "Hey, Grandma," in a voice that had not yet learned to be guarded with me, which was a gift I did not intend to waste. "Hey, baby, how was your week?" "It was fine," he said. "Actually," he stopped. I waited. "Actually, it wasn't great. There's this thing with my friend, his name is Jordan, and I don't really know what to do about it. Every part of me that had spent 68 years being Ruby's daughter wanted to ask, what happened? What did he do? What are you going to do about it? The forward-pointed questions, the management, the love that was always looking at the next thing rather than the present one. I took a breath. Tell me, I said, not what happened. Not here's what you should do. Not have you talked to your parents about it, just tell me. Noah told me, all of it, the whole tangled, unresolved 14-year-old complexity of it, the kind of thing that doesn't have a clean solution and doesn't need one, the kind of thing that mostly just needs to be said to someone who will hold it without dropping it, or immediately trying to fix its shape. I listened. I asked one question in the middle that was not a solution, just a question that meant I'm still here, I'm following you, I want to understand. And then I listened more. When he was done, he was quiet for a moment. Thanks, Grandma, he said. Of course, baby. You didn't tell me what to do, he said, slightly surprised, slightly something else. Did you want me to? A pause. No, he said. No. This was good. Downstairs in the kitchen, Darius was at the counter when Noah came down for dinner 20 minutes later. Keisha was at the stove. The ordinary machinery of a family's evening, unremarkable and irreplaceable. Who were you talking to? Darius asked. Grandma, Noah said, opening the refrigerator. Darius went still for just a moment. Then he turned back to the counter. How is she? Keisha asked. Good, Noah said. She just listened the whole time. It was nice. Darius looked at the counter. He did not say anything. But Keisha, who notices things, looked at him and then looked away, and the small smile she kept to herself as she turned back to the stove was for him, and also for something larger than him. For all of it, maybe. For the fact that some things that have been broken for a very long time can, with enough willingness, begin to be repaired. Not completely, not all at once, but genuinely. In Savannah, I was sitting on the back porch in the May evening, the garden coming up green and new around Raymond's rosemary. The zinnias were not yet blooming, but they were growing, sturdy little stems pushing up through the dark soil with the particular stubbornness of things that have decided to exist. I had spent 68 years carrying what Ruby gave me, the strength of it and the silence of it, the love that worked so hard it forgot to be still. I could not go back and unknow any of it. I could not return to Darius's childhood and sit on the floor of his room with 2 sodas and no agenda. I could not unlive the 48 hours after Raymond's funeral, or the Sunday calls that lasted 20 minutes and covered everything but the real things. What I could do was what I was doing. I was learning a new language at 68 years old. I was learning it imperfectly, with a therapist's help and my son's patience, and my best friend's 40 years of willingness to tell me the truth. I was learning it because Ruby had left me a letter that told me it was possible, and because Darius had spent 3 years in a therapist's office doing the hard work of breaking a chain so that Noah would never have to, and because Noah had called me on a Sunday evening and said it wasn't great, actually, and trusted me to hear it. The chain had been long. Women I would never know had forged the first links of it in circumstances I could not fully imagine, making the only choices available to them. I did not blame them. I did not entirely blame Ruby. I did not entirely blame myself. But I was the one who got to decide where it ended. It ended here, on this porch, in this garden, with a 14-year-old boy in Atlanta who had called his grandmother on a Sunday evening, not because he had to, but because he knew she would listen. Ruby would have called that something to show for it. I think she would have been right. If there is a woman in your life, a mother, a daughter, a grandmother, who loves hard but struggles to be still, share this with her, not as an accusation, as a door. Sometimes the bravest thing you can say is not "I'm sorry." Sometimes it's just, "Tell me." And then, wait.